Lily gripped her bike's handlebars, standing proudly in front of her small-town diner. The diner was a friendly place she loved, filled with familiar faces, laughter, and the scent of coffee and fried food. Every Saturday, she rode her bike there to watch the comings and goings, imagining that one day she'd be like the real bikers who roared through town on huge, shiny motorcycles. Her dad used to be one of them, a real biker who could silence a crowd with a glance. To her, that seemed like the coolest thing in the world. At 7 years old, Lily's bike was her pride and joy. It had a little pink bell, a worn-out seat, and wheels that squeaked no matter how many times her dad oiled them. But in her eyes, it was a serious bike, one that she rode with the same confidence and swagger as her dad had back in the day. She'd push herself faster, practicing sharp turns, mimicking the rumbling engine she imagined alongside her. She was convinced that if she practiced hard enough, her little bike would start sounding like a Harley someday. Today, however, she was distracted. The whole town seemed to be out, gathered around the diner and nearby shops, chatting and enjoying the crisp Saturday morning. Lily had always felt comfortable around these folks. They watched her grow up, and many of them had seen her father in his younger days as a respected biker. She had heard stories from them about how her dad could fix any bike, ride through any storm, and command the attention of everyone around him. She was determined to live up to that legacy, even if her bike was far smaller and didn't rumble like his. As she tried to execute a tight turn, something went wrong. Her bike gave a sudden jolt, and the handlebars twisted out of her grip. She skidded to a halt, heart pounding, and looked down to see her chain had slipped off, and one pedal was slightly bent. She tried to fix it, fiddling with the chain and wiping her greasy hands on her jeans. Her small fingers struggled to get everything in place, but she kept at it, biting her lip and hoping no one would notice. But someone did. She heard a chuckle behind her, a loud, mocking sound that shattered the quiet confidence she'd been trying to hold on to. She turned to see a group of men standing by the curb, leaning against their big, shiny bikes. They looked tough, dressed in leather jackets with dark sunglasses and tattoos covering their arms. Their bikes were enormous compared to hers, with sleek, polished chrome that glinted in the sunlight. These weren't friendly faces. They were strangers passing through, and from the looks of it, they had no intention of being kind. One of the bikers sneered, crossing his arms as he watched her struggle with the bike chain. "You call that a bike?" he said, his voice dripping with mockery. The others laughed, a deep, mocking sound that echoed across the street. Another biker leaned forward, smirking. "You'll never be a real rider with that piece of junk," he taunted. "Better stick to training wheels, kid." Lily felt her cheeks burn, a mix of embarrassment and anger bubbling up inside her. She wanted to say something back, to prove them wrong, but the words got caught in her throat. They kept laughing, and every mocking word hit her harder than the last. She turned away, gripping her bike tightly, desperate not to let them see how much their words hurt her. She knew she was just a kid, and her bike wasn't anything like theirs, but it had always felt like enough until now. Slowly, she walked her bike away from them, her head down. Her heart felt heavy, and the excitement she'd felt that morning seemed to vanish with every step. She had dreamed of being like her dad, of riding with the same confidence and strength he had. But now, as she pushed her broken bike home, she wondered if she'd ever be anything more than a little kid with a small, squeaky bike. When she finally reached home, her dad was there, working on something in the garage. He looked up, noticing her solemn face and the broken bike at her side. Her dad, Dave, looked up from his work as Lily approached, her eyes downcast, and her bike dragging along the gravel with a sad clinking sound. Dave had seen her come home full of enthusiasm so many times before, her eyes sparkling with excitement after a ride around town. But now, her shoulders slumped, and there was a different expression on her face, one he hadn't seen before. Putting down his tools, he walked over, concern in his gaze. "Hey, Lillipad," he said gently, using his nickname for her. "What happened to your bike?" He knelt down, inspecting the bent pedal and the loose chain, but Lily didn't answer. She just stood there, biting her lip and blinking back tears. Finally, she took a shaky breath and looked up at him, her voice barely more than a whisper. "Some guys, some bikers," she muttered, her words tumbling out as if saying them out loud would make it all worse. "They made fun of me, Dad. They laughed at my bike and said I'd never be a real rider. They said my bike was junk." She clenched her fists, looking away as if ashamed to admit it. "I tried to fix it myself, but they just kept laughing." Dave felt a mix of emotions, anger, sadness, and a fierce protectiveness over his daughter. Seeing her hurt, feeling defeated, tore at him. Lily wasn't just any kid. She was strong, determined, and had inherited his love for the open road. But those strangers had shaken her confidence, making her feel small and unworthy. Dave's fists tightened, his jaw clenched as he fought back the urge to storm back into town and teach those bikers a lesson himself. But he knew that wouldn't be enough to help Lily feel better. Instead, he took a deep breath, softened his expression, and placed a hand on her shoulder. "Listen, Lillipad," he said softly, meeting her gaze. "You're as much of a rider as anyone else, no matter what those guys said. Your bike, no matter how small or how squeaky, is yours. It's not about the size or how fancy it is. It's about the heart you put into it." Lily looked at him, her eyes searching his face, and a hint of a smile tugged at her lips. She knew her dad was trying to comfort her, and a part of her believed him, but the hurt was still fresh, and the mocking voices echoed in her mind, making her feel small and foolish. Seeing that his words alone weren't enough to restore her confidence, Dave had an idea, a bold one. He knew there was only one way to show Lily the strength and family she had behind her, to help her realize she wasn't alone and that she was, in every way, her father's daughter. The old part of him, the part that used to ride with his gang, sparked back to life, and he knew just the people to call. "Lily," he said, a grin slowly spreading across his face, "what do you say we show those guys what it really means to be a rider? I've got some friends who might be able to help fix up that bike of yours." He winked at her, his eyes twinkling with a mischievous spark she hadn't seen before. "And I think it's about time they met the newest member of the family." Lily's eyes widened in surprise, her sadness momentarily replaced by a mixture of excitement and curiosity. She'd heard stories about her dad's old biker days, how he'd been part of a group of men who rode together, loyal as brothers, and who never let anyone mess with one of their own. She'd never seen that part of his life up close, though, only through old photos and the occasional story he'd tell her when they were alone in the garage. Without another word, Dave led Lily inside, grabbed his phone, and scrolled through the contacts until he found the number he was looking for. The number belonged to Big Mike, the leader of his old gang, the Iron Giants. They'd gone their separate ways over the years, but the bond they'd shared hadn't faded. The Iron Giants were more than just a gang. They were family, bound by trust and respect, even after all this time. The phone rang only once before a familiar, booming voice answered. "Dave, it's been too long, brother. What's the occasion?" "Mike," Dave replied, a smile in his voice, "I've got a favor to ask. It's for my daughter." He glanced at Lily, who was watching him with wide eyes, and continued, explaining everything. How some bikers had made fun of her, how they'd shaken her confidence, and how he wanted to show her that family had her back. By the time he finished, Mike was quiet for a moment, then let out a hearty laugh. "Oh, Dave, you don't even need to ask. We'll be there. And I'll bring the whole crew," Mike replied with a grin that Dave could hear through the phone. "No one messes with an Iron Giants kid. We'll make sure of that." They set a time for the next day, and Dave hung up, feeling a familiar thrill he hadn't felt in years. It wasn't just about defending his daughter. It was about teaching her a lesson in resilience, strength, and the power of family. The rest of the evening passed with a quiet excitement. Lily could hardly sleep, her mind racing with thoughts of what her dad's friends would be like. She wondered if they'd be like the bikers who had mocked her, or if they'd be different. Strong and fierce, but kind. She knew her dad wouldn't bring them here if he didn't trust them, and that trust began to steady her nerves. As she drifted off to sleep, she imagined herself riding alongside a gang of powerful bikers, feeling like she belonged. In the morning, she was up before dawn, watching her dad polish his own bike. She noticed the way his hands moved with care and expertise, and for the first time, she saw a different side of him. Not just her father, but a rider, a man who had once roared down highways with his friends by his side. Today, he was ready to remind her of that part of him, and in doing so, show her the strength within herself. The next morning, the sun hadn't even fully risen, but Lily was already wide awake. The quiet town was just beginning to stir, with a few early risers heading to the diner for breakfast. Lily peered out the window, her stomach a bundle of nerves and excitement. She'd spent the night tossing and turning, dreaming of loud engines, leather jackets, and flashing chrome. Her dad had always been her hero, but the idea of seeing him as a biker, the kind of rider she'd only heard stories about, made her feel like she was about to step into a new world. Down in the garage, Dave was already hard at work, polishing his old Harley. He hadn't ridden it in years, but today he dusted it off, checked every part, and made sure it was in perfect shape. The bike gleamed under his touch, a powerful reminder of a time when the Iron Giants had been his family on the open road. He remembered the late-night rides, the miles they'd covered together, and the feeling of wind rushing past as they roared down empty highways. Those memories felt alive again, and he couldn't help but smile as he thought about what was to come. As he tightened a bolt on the handlebars, he looked up to see Lily standing in the doorway, eyes wide, watching him with a mixture of awe and curiosity. She wore the same jeans and hoodie from yesterday, but today there was something different in her posture, something stronger, more determined. "Hey, Lillipad," he said, smiling as he beckoned her over. "Want to help me get this old beast ready?" Lily nodded, hurrying over to his side. He handed her a cloth, and together, they polished the bike in silence, sharing a quiet, unspoken understanding. She could see how much the bike meant to him. And for the first time, she truly understood why her dad loved riding so much. It wasn't just about the bike or the speed. It was about freedom, strength, and the family you rode with. "Dad," she asked quietly, "do you think I'll ever be a real rider? Like you?" Dave paused, looking at her with a serious expression. "Lily, being a real rider isn't about the bike or the gear. It's about heart, and you've got more heart than anyone I know." He put a hand on her shoulder, squeezing it gently. "You don't need anyone else's approval to know who you are." Just as he finished speaking, a low, rumbling sound filled the air. At first, it was distant, like a far-off thunderstorm, but it grew louder and louder until it became an unmistakable roar. Lily's eyes widened as she looked down the road, where a line of motorcycles was coming into view. There were at least a dozen of them, each one gleaming in the morning light, their riders dressed in leather and denim, faces serious but friendly as they approached. One by one, the bikes pulled up in front of their house, forming a semicircle around the garage. The riders shut off their engines, and for a moment, the air was thick with silence, broken only by the soft ticking of cooling engines. Then, the biggest man of the group, a tall, burly biker with a graying beard and a leather jacket with the words Iron Giants emblazoned across the back, dismounted and strode over to Dave, his face breaking into a wide grin. "Dave!" the man boomed, pulling him into a bear hug. "It's been too long, brother." "Mike," Dave replied, smiling as he returned the hug. "Thanks for coming. I knew I could count on you guys." Mike released him, then looked down at Lily, who was staring up at him with wide eyes. "And you must be Lily," he said, his voice softer but still warm. "I hear you've got yourself a bike that needs a little fixing up. Well, lucky for you, we're pretty good with bikes around here." Lily couldn't believe what was happening. These men, tough, strong, and powerful, were all here for her. They weren't here to laugh or mock her. They were here to support her, to help her. She felt a swell of pride, mixed with a little nervousness. But as she looked around at the kind faces, she realized she wasn't afraid. One by one, the other bikers introduced themselves, each with a handshake or a pat on the shoulder. There was Big Tom, a giant of a man with arms like tree trunks. Slim, who was wiry and sharp-eyed. Jo, the only woman in the group, with a quick smile and a scar on her cheek that made her look like she'd seen her fair share of adventure, and a few others, each with their own unique presence. They treated her like an equal, like someone who belonged with them, and that feeling alone made her stand a little taller. Once introductions were done, the gang got to work. They gathered around Lily's bike, inspecting it with serious, thoughtful expressions. Big Tom crouched down, turning the bent pedal and muttering to himself, while Jo ran her fingers over the chain, assessing the damage. "We're gonna make this bike shine, Lily," Jo said with a wink, "and we'll make sure it rides smoother than ever." The gang moved with an easy camaraderie, each member knowing exactly what to do, working together like a well-oiled machine. They fetched tools from their saddlebags, tightening bolts, adjusting the chain, and even adding a few new parts they brought along. Jo handed Lily a small bottle of metallic paint, telling her she could pick any design she wanted for her bike. Lily's eyes sparkled with excitement as she thought about what her bike could look like. A real rider's bike, just like her dad's. As she painted, the Iron Giants shared stories of their own riding days. Big Tom talked about the time he'd gotten lost in the mountains for 3 days with nothing but his bike and a canteen of water. Slim laughed as he recounted a wild ride through the desert where his bike's engine overheated, and he had to walk miles to find help. Each story was filled with challenges, humor, and the kind of loyalty that only came from riding together. They weren't just a gang. They were a family, bound by shared experiences and a love for the open road. Dave watched his daughter with pride as she worked alongside his old friends. He could see the change in her, the way her shoulders relaxed, the light in her eyes as she listened to their stories, and the quiet confidence that seemed to grow with every passing moment. She was finding her place, realizing that she didn't need anyone's approval to be strong. She already had everything she needed within herself, and the Iron Giants were there to remind her of that. Finally, after what felt like hours, the bike was ready. It gleamed in the sunlight, the fresh paint catching the light, and the new parts polished to perfection. Lily stepped back, her heart pounding as she looked at her newly transformed bike. It was still small, still hers, but now it felt like more than just a bike. It felt like a part of her, a symbol of her strength, her determination, and the family who had come together to help her. "Go on, Lillipad," Dave said, his voice full of pride. "Give it a ride." Lily climbed onto the bike, her hands steady on the handlebars. She took a deep breath, then pushed off, feeling the smoothness of the ride as the bike glided down the street. The Iron Giants cheered as she rode, their voices filling the air with pride and encouragement. She felt like she was flying, like nothing could hold her back. This was what it meant to be a rider. Not the size of the bike, not the roar of the engine, but the strength inside her and the people who believed in her. As she circled back, she saw the mocking bikers from yesterday watching from a distance, their faces a mix of surprise and intimidation. They knew they'd been beaten, not by threats or violence, but by the strength of a family that stood together. Lily grinned as she rode past them, her confidence soaring. For the first time, she felt like she belonged, not just in the town, but in the legacy her dad had passed down to her. The Iron Giants clapped as she pulled up beside them, and each one offered her a high five, congratulating her on her ride. She looked up at her dad, who was beaming with pride, and she felt something shift inside her. She was no longer just a little girl with a broken bike. She was part of something bigger, something strong and unbreakable. As Lily pulled up next to her dad and the Iron Giants, her heart was pounding with a sense of accomplishment and pride she'd never felt before. The gang members patted her on the back, giving her gruff but warm words of encouragement. Jo ruffled her hair, telling her she'd ridden like a pro. Lily's cheeks flushed with joy, her face breaking into a grin as she looked at each of them. This group of tough bikers, people who had seen and been through so much, were here, cheering her on as if she'd just won a race. The atmosphere was filled with laughter, jokes, and warmth as they admired the new look of her bike. The bright metallic paint sparkled, the polished chrome caught the sunlight, and the new, sturdy pedal felt smooth under her foot. It was still her bike, but it looked stronger, braver. It felt like a reflection of how she felt inside, like she was growing into someone capable of standing up for herself. Just then, from across the street, Lily caught sight of the same group of bikers who had mocked her the day before. They had stopped their own ride, watching from a distance with a mix of shock and uncertainty on their faces. They recognized the Iron Giants, clearly unsettled by their presence. The once laughing bikers shifted nervously, avoiding eye contact with the intimidating group who stood protectively around Lily. The Iron Giants noticed too. Big Mike raised an eyebrow and shot them a look that seemed to say, "Think twice before you mess with one of ours." The mocking bikers exchanged glances, their confident smirks gone, replaced by a quiet realization of who they were up against. After a moment, they got back on their bikes, revved their engines, and rode away, tails between their legs. Lily watched them go, a feeling of triumph bubbling up inside her. Yesterday, their taunts had made her feel small and uncertain. But today, surrounded by her dad and his friends, she felt like a giant herself. They hadn't needed to confront or scare off those bikers with anything other than quiet strength and unity, and that alone was enough to make her feel empowered. "Looks like they got the message," Slim said with a chuckle, watching them disappear down the road. Lily grinned, glancing up at her dad. He winked at her, pride shining in his eyes. "Told you, Lillipad. You're tougher than you know," he said. As the excitement of the moment settled, the Iron Giants turned their attention back to Lily. Big Tom took off his leather jacket, revealing a worn patch on the back that read Iron Giants, with an emblem of a roaring lion. He held it out to her with a solemn expression, the others nodding in approval. "We don't hand these out to just anyone, kid," he said, his voice soft but serious. "But we want you to have this. You've got the heart of a real rider, and that's what matters most. Wear it with pride." Lily took the jacket, her hands shaking slightly. She could feel the weight of it, not just in its leather material, but in what it symbolized. She slipped it on, feeling the comforting warmth and the sense of belonging it offered. It was a little big on her, but that didn't matter. To her, it was perfect. The gang clapped, cheering her on as she stood proudly in her new jacket. Dave wrapped an arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. She could see the pride in his eyes, the joy of sharing something so meaningful with her. This was more than just a jacket or a bike. It was a reminder that she had people who believed in her, who would always stand by her side. The townsfolk gathered around, curious about the scene unfolding in the street. They watched Lily grow up, knew her dad's history with the Iron Giants, and seeing them all here, standing together, made the townspeople smile. A few cheered her on, clapping and whistling, while others shook Dave's hand, congratulating him on raising such a brave and strong daughter. "Give it another spin, Lily," Joe called out, encouraging her to take another ride around town. Feeling emboldened, Lily climbed back onto her bike, gripping the handlebars with newfound confidence. The jacket felt snug and strong against her shoulders as she rode, the Iron Giants cheering and clapping behind her. She could feel the strength of her dad, of his friends, and of the whole town that had come out to watch her. As she rode down the main street, she waved to the onlookers who cheered her on, feeling like she was part of something big, something important. She wasn't just a little girl with a squeaky bike anymore. She was part of a legacy, a story of resilience and strength. And for the first time, she understood what it meant to be a rider. When she circled back to the Iron Giants, they greeted her with even more cheers and applause. Big Mike crouched down, his grizzled face breaking into a warm smile. "Remember, kid," he said, his voice low and sincere, "it's not the bike that makes the rider. It's the heart. And you've got one of the strongest hearts I've seen." Lily nodded, beaming with pride. She glanced up at her dad, who was watching her with misty eyes. This was her moment, one she'd remember forever. She knew now that no matter what challenges she faced, no matter who tried to knock her down, she had something unbreakable inside her, and that made her feel unstoppable. The Iron Giants began to mount their bikes, preparing to ride off, but not before they each gave her a parting nod, handshake, or a friendly ruffle of her hair. Big Mike was the last to leave, giving her one last piece of advice as he mounted his bike. "Keep that heart strong, Lily," he said. "And remember, you've got family here anytime you need us." With that, the Iron Giants roared back to life, their engines filling the air with a powerful, comforting rumble. One by one, they rode off down the street, leaving Lily and her dad standing side by side, watching them go. As the sound of the engines faded, Lily looked up at her dad, who placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "I'm proud of you, Lillipad," he said softly, his voice filled with emotion. "You showed them what real strength looks like." Lily nodded, her heart full. She squeezed his hand, feeling a bond with him that was deeper and stronger than ever before. They stood there together, father and daughter, two riders sharing a moment of pride and connection. As they headed back toward their house, Lily glanced down at her newly upgraded bike and the leather jacket draped over her shoulders. She knew that no matter what anyone said, she had everything she needed to be a real rider. And whenever she rode, she'd carry the Iron Giant's strength with her, knowing they were her family too. As the Iron Giants disappeared down the road, leaving only the faint rumble of their engines echoing in the distance, Lily felt a profound sense of peace and joy settling over her. She looked down at the leather jacket, still warm from Big Tom's hands, and felt as though it wrapped her in a shield of confidence and pride. The jacket was slightly too big, but that didn't matter. It was a perfect fit for her heart. She traced her fingers over the worn leather patch on the back, the emblem of the roaring lion, and the words Iron Giants seeming to pulse with a life of their own. Her dad's hand was still resting on her shoulder, steady and comforting, and she looked up at him with a smile that was a mixture of gratitude and wonder. They didn't need to speak. In that quiet moment, they both knew what the other felt. She wasn't just his little girl anymore. She was his legacy, carrying on the strength and values he'd once built with the Iron Giants. They began the walk back to their house, and Lily felt as if every step was lighter than the last. The weight of yesterday's embarrassment had disappeared, replaced with something far more enduring, a sense of belonging, not just to her family but to a tradition of resilience, respect, and courage. As they reached their driveway, Dave stopped and looked down at her, his eyes soft and thoughtful. "Lily," he said, breaking the silence, "I want you to remember something." He knelt down so he could look her in the eyes. Being a rider, being a part of something bigger, it's not just about bikes. It's about knowing who you are, standing up for yourself, and standing by the people you care about. You showed all of that today. You've got the heart of a rider, and that's something no one can take away from you. Lily nodded, absorbing his words. She felt stronger, older somehow, as though the courage she'd felt when riding with the Iron Giants had woven itself into her. She would never forget how those bikers had laughed at her, but now the memory no longer stung. Instead, it reminded her of the power she discovered within herself, the support of her dad and his friends, and the love that made her feel unbreakable. Just then, her dad reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small box. He handed it to her with a warm smile, and Lily took it, curiosity flickering in her eyes. She lifted the lid, revealing a small, polished silver key. She looked up at her dad, surprised. "What's this for?" she asked, her fingers brushing over the key's cool surface. Dave chuckled. "It's for something I've been working on in the garage. I've been saving it for a special day, and I think today is the perfect day for you to have it." They walked to the garage, and Dave led her inside, where an old but beautifully restored mini motorcycle was waiting. It was a smaller version of the bikes the Iron Giants rode, complete with chrome details and a sleek, classic design. Her dad had clearly put in hours of work to make it perfect, every detail lovingly polished and crafted. Lily's mouth dropped open in astonishment, and she could hardly believe her eyes. It was everything she dreamed of, a real bike, one that looked like it belonged with the Iron Giant's fleet. "Dad, it's amazing," she whispered, running her fingers over the seat and handlebars. She felt tears prick her eyes, overwhelmed by the thoughtfulness and care her dad had put into this gift. Dave smiled, his pride shining through. "It's all yours, Lillipad. I figured it was time for you to have a bike that matches that jacket. And now, whenever you ride, you'll remember that you're a part of something special." Lily climbed onto the mini motorcycle, feeling the smoothness of the seat beneath her and the sturdiness of the handlebars in her grip. She turned the key, and the engine purred to life, a gentle but powerful hum that filled her with excitement. It wasn't as loud as the Iron Giant's Harleys, but to her, it was perfect. "Come on, let's go for a ride," Dave said, hopping onto his own Harley and gesturing for her to follow. They rode out of the driveway, side by side, father and daughter. The early afternoon sun cast a warm glow over the road as they cruised through town, the townsfolk waving and cheering as they passed. With every turn of the wheels, Lily felt her confidence grow, her heart swelling with pride. This wasn't just any ride. It was her first real ride as a part of something larger, a rider, a member of a family, and a legacy that stretched back long before her. She didn't need anyone else's approval, didn't need anyone to tell her who she was. She knew. As they reached the edge of town, Dave pulled over, and Lily did the same, stopping her bike next to his. They looked out over the open road stretching ahead of them, disappearing into the distance. It was a road she'd one day travel, and she knew her dad would always be there, guiding her with every mile. "You ready for more rides like this, Lillipad?" Dave asked, a smile playing on his lips. Lily looked up at him, her face alight with excitement and certainty. "I'm ready, Dad. I'm ready for anything." The two of them sat there for a while, gazing out at the road and sharing a quiet moment. Lily knew that wherever life took her, she'd carry this day in her heart. It was the day she discovered who she really was, a rider, a part of a family, and stronger than she'd ever known. The world stretched out before her, full of possibility, and she knew she'd ride it all with courage, confidence, and the Iron Giant spirit guiding her every step of the way. As they headed back home, her dad's words echoed in her mind, a promise she'd hold close forever. Asterisk, it's not the bike that makes the rider. It's the heart